She is not the same woman I married 25 years ago. Sandy, that woman, is gone. She doesn't realise how blessed she is. She cannot comprehend the pain and the trauma on her children. We need to free Sandra from her distorted reality. How Sandy thought alienation of the family was a good plan, I don't know. Nico was forced by Sandy to write false statements on Facebook. These were not true words. These were his mother's words. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, hello, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am, and I'm a little nervous to tell this one. Well, I'm not nervous to tell it, but here's the situation. This story, right, I've been wanting to tell this story for, I'm going to say, about 3 months. I've wanted to tell this one for so long, and I've hesitated, I've questioned it, I've gone back, I've gone forth. I've been all around the bloody block with it. The reason that I'm hesitating is this story is still ongoing. This is something that's still happening in the court system right now. I think it's fascinating. I think it's so weird. I think it's so interesting. Once it got into my head, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't make sense of it. Then I made sense of it. Then I just got even more confused. The reason I've been hesitating to tell it is because not other podcasts, I don't know another podcast that's actually covered the story, but there was a couple of radio shows who tried to talk about the story, and those radio shows were shut down. The family involved in this do not like this story to be told, but I think I'm just going to risk it. Now, what I am going to do is I'm not going to editorialise on this story much. I'm going to try and just tell you factually what I know, what is out there, what is understood. And so everything that I'm kind of telling you, I might have the odd opinion here and there on things, but don't take any of my opinions as fact. I'm just presenting you the story as it is. Okay? So, I don't want any trouble. I just want to tell you this story. This is the story of the Grazzini rookies. Okay, who are the players in this story? Well, we have David the rookie, and we have Sandra Grazzini, and together, jointly, they are David and Sandra Grazzini rookie. They have 5 children. The 2 children that you need to know about in this story are Gianna and Samantha, who are teenagers. So the story takes place in Minnesota, USA. And, you know, there's plenty of home movies which show the family of 7 as a happy, loving, of course hectic and very busy, but a happy family. David owns his own business. Sandra is a flight attendant and she has competed in many beauty pageants. She's attractive. I'd say in the future, if there was ever a movie about this, and there may well be, the perfect casting, Angelica Houston. She would be so perfect at playing Sandra Grazzini rookie. Okay, so it's happy families. It's wealth, health and happiness. But no, it's not. Behind closed doors, Sandra says the house was a place of terror for her and her children. She claims David was an abusive husband and that she and the children would often have to lock themselves in rooms to hide from him when he hit the absolute rage and would go mental. Years, she says, years of mental and physical abuse, years of living in fear from David. She says he would throw hammers at her. What? Throwing hammers? That's fucking brutal. She claims that he broke her ribs, that she had black eyes, and she claims that the children were also the target of his rages. Now, Sandra says that along the way she documented all of this and that she'd sent letters to family members claiming that she was terrified. She was terrified for her safety, for the safety of the children, and she wanted to make sure that this was documented. This was known. So after years of this, now by this point the kids are all somewhere between age 8 and 15. So the two girls that I mentioned, so Gianna and Samantha, they're at the upper end of that. They're around the 15 age. She finally files for a divorce. David leaves the family home. He leaves at this point. Now, Sandra says at this point, he ends up trying to get back into the house, and he does this by trying to break in. She has the locks all changed, and he tries to get into the house up to 20 times. She has to keep calling police. Police have to come and tell him. He has to stay away from the house. She says there's a night, she's in the house, she's with the 5 kids. He arrives, he gets into the house, and he attempts to choke her. Now, the children have just stopped speaking to their father entirely. He calls and he calls and he calls them, but they just ignore him. He leaves some pretty horrible, pretty vicious voicemails. Now, those are public, you can hear those. Now, a family lawyer intervenes and he tries to sort of facilitate a relationship between the kids and their dad, but the kids don't want it. The kids are not interested in having a relationship with their father. They're very clear they don't want to see him. So Nico, one of the sons, he goes on Facebook and he puts up this status that says, "My dad is a bad man." And this is backed up by a voicemail that David has left his son Nico, where he's shouting viciously down the phone at him. And Nico was using this as an example of, my dad is a really bad man. Gianna and Samantha, they speak openly about the horror that is living with their father, the terror that he put them through. David says at this time, he says, "I don't have a problem with anger." He says, "Yeah, sometimes I get frustrated and I'll admit that." He says that when he shouts, you're going to know about it because he's a big guy. But he says, "Yes, I get angry. Yes, I shout and I get very fucking frustrated. But I've never raised a hand to any of my kids. And I've never touched Sandra. I've never actually ever hit my wife." So let's pause. Again, remembering that everything I'm telling you, it's just factual. It's just information that's out there. The story so far, obviously, it's terrible. But it's not really out with the reach of any of our understandings, I wouldn't imagine. Like, I'm saying it's perfectly possible, it's perfectly plausible. Yeah, I think it is. However, the judge that's appointed to look at the case, that judge thinks otherwise. He says, hang on, there's absolutely no evidence of any abuse. He says, actually, Sandra, you're the problem in the situation. Evidence of abuse. Now, I keep circling around this phrase. The judge is very clear when he says there is no evidence of abuse. How does someone evidence that? Now, I already said she was taking note of it. She was telling family members what was happening. She was writing it down and writing them letters and saying, David came home and he was angry and he hit me or he did this and he shouted and he threw things and he whatever. So she's documenting it. But physical marks, scars, you're asking people to be able to prove that something has happened that might have happened 6 months ago. So those scars are going to have gone. That bruising is going to have faded away. This idea of how do you evidence abuse? I mean, what do you do? Do you just take a photograph of every bruise? Maybe you do. Maybe that's the way to do it. I'm just saying I find the idea of evidence of abuse a very muddy area. In any case, and not even just this one. I mean, if we journey way back to maybe episode, I don't know what it was, Menendez Brothers, episode 3, 4, something like that. 4, I think it was. Again, that their entire case rested on the fact that they were saying, we've been abused, but there's no evidence of it. There's just no actual physical evidence. So if a person says they've been emotionally abused for years, what is the test for truth? What is it that determines if you're lying? So the judge says Sandra is the problem and that she is brainwashing the children against their father. David's lawyer explains that she believes Sandra had made the children afraid of their father. She made them truly believe that he was a monster. Now, bear in mind, the kids aren't small kids. I mean, they're old enough to kind of know their own minds and say what they want. I know that brainwashing can happen at any age. It can happen to anybody at any time. But these kids weren't, there were some young kids in the family, but they weren't all wee kids who were easy to brainwash. So David's lawyer also says that Sandra has told the kids, you need to say this about your dad. You need to say he's abusive. You need to say he's aggressive, because when we divorce, you'll end up having to go and live with him. And actually what you want is you want to live with me. So let's all say he's been abusive, he's a terrible father, and that way you'll all end up coming to live with me. So, I mean, given that some thought, I guess, I don't know, maybe she had the kids worried that they would be taken away from her. I don't know. What is the whole thing fabricated? Don't know. Now, David has some convictions against him at this point. He's been involved previously in a bar fight. He's also been accused of stalking a local woman, which is not great. And he's been involved in a road rage incident. So those are all pretty mental. I mean, stalking someone. Fuck's sake, people go to prison for stalking. Do you know what I mean? Road rage. Again, did we learn anything from the Tracy Andrews episode? Yeah, I think we did. These things are, they're not good. And I think that whether you believe what Sandra's saying or not believe, you can't really argue those convictions. So there is a picture forming of a quite angry man. So the next thing the judge does, when I was researching this, I'm not kidding, I actually did comedy shocked face. You know when you see like a bad actor trying to look shocked, or like an extra in the back of a TV programme, like in a courtroom or something, trying to look shocked? That's what I did. I actually did comedy shocked face. The judge orders Sandra out of the house, and she orders that the children be taken away from Sandra's custody. What? It was unbelievable. She's the one bringing the charge against him. She's saying, look, this man is abusive. He has caused me nothing but terror for years. We, as a family, live in fear. And the judge goes, right, you, Sandra, you get away. Let's remove you from the situation. She says, those kids are what I live for. I have never abused, hurt, or neglected my children. This is where everything is starting to just go entirely wrong. I have no idea how we got here. So David's older sister, Tammy, she moves into the house and becomes temporary guardian of the kids. But the kids, they don't love this situation. Gianna and Samantha, the two oldest daughters, they especially don't particularly like this. In April 2013, Gianni and Samantha, they return home from wherever they'd been. I don't know if that was school, wherever they had been. And David's older sister, Tammy, who's there as the guardian, she hears them both like talking on the phone to someone. She doesn't know who it is, but she doesn't really think a great deal of it. So the girls are home, everyone's in, she's making dinner. 20 minutes later, both girls have entirely disappeared from the house. Tammy calls the police and it gets reported. So the big questions are, where are they? Who were they on the phone to? What do Sandra and David, neither of whom are anywhere near that house, what do they have to say? Now, what you'd expect to happen at this point, or what I would expect to happen at this point, is a search. A pretty massive one, I would think. 2 teenage girls have gone missing. Sandra Sandra's not told by a family member. Sandra's told by her lawyer that the daughters are missing. That's idiotic. Why not police? Why not Tammy? Why not David? I would be fucking livid. I would be livid if my kids had gone missing and I was told by my lawyer. So, is there a big search put into place? No. Why? Why is there no big search? Surely that is standard. Very odd. Very odd indeed. Sandra goes into a panic. She starts to fear the worst. She starts imagining all the terrible things you can imagine. We can all imagine what she's thinking. David too is absolutely terrified for his girls. But David begins to suspect something. He begins to think that Sandra knows more about Gianna and Samantha's disappearance than she is saying. The weeks pass and there's no sign of the missing girls. So let's compare the parents' behaviour during the time when the girls are missing. David hires a private detective to try and find the girls. He begins to follow Sandra whenever she isn't working in secret to see if she will somehow lead him to his daughters. He begins to have conversations with family members in which he discusses preparing himself, meaning that he thinks he's going to have to face the worst outcome for his daughters. I mean, it's all gone very spy thriller at this point. Very weird. Sandra's behaviour. Sandra continues during the time the girls are missing to work. She is flying around the world. I mean, I'm not attacking that. She probably can't afford to not work. So, but again, you have to weigh it up and kind of go, well, she maybe can't afford to not work, but at the same time, her daughters are missing. She also is putting up photos on Facebook at the time of her at like a sports game, having fun with friends. Then there's a photo of her on a boat, having a lovely afternoon. So you're like, well, okay, I mean, that sits oddly. Your two daughters are missing. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be putting up a photograph of me on a yacht drinking a martini. I've never had a martini. But you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. During this time, Sandra made no calls to police to check on any of the progress about finding the daughters. But she claims, the judge had ordered her not to do this. She says, a judge told me that if I was to, phone police and try and find out where my daughters were, that would just lead to more trouble for me. So, reporters that she tells that information to, they look into that because they think, that can't be right. It can't be right that a judge has said to you, you're not allowed to try and phone police and find out where your missing daughters are. And in fact, it's actually the complete opposite in the document. The court document states very clearly that while she doesn't have custody of the kids, she is to report any problems to the police at any point, and she is allowed to be in constant contact with them. So, Sandra's not really telling the truth at this point. I also think at that point, fuck the rules. Fuck the fucking rules. I would not care at that moment if a judge had said that to me. I'd be like, my two daughters are missing. I don't care what a judge has said to me. I am going to phone police every 5 minutes until I get an update, until I can find some information about where they are. So the girls have now been missing for a month. And here comes the twist. They show up. The girls, they show up. They show up on live TV. They say, we want to speak about what's been happening and we want to do it on live TV. Okay, sure. So, they arrive at a hotel. No one knows how they get there. They're interviewed by Fox 9. And in this interview, they say they're scared. They don't have their mum to protect them. And they're terrified of their dad. They're terrified of how abusive David is. They offer absolutely no explanation about where they've been. And quick as a flash, as soon as the interview finishes, they're gone. I mean, this is just so strange. So, I mean, the questions and the thoughts that I have, please tell me you're on the same page as me. Why was David not at that hotel? If his 2 daughters appear out of the blue, safe and sound, why is he not there? Why is Sandra not there? Also, other family members. I mean, I know that, like, there's judges involved and there's all these people involved, but why is there no family member at that hotel when they're doing this interview going, come home? Where are you staying? Where are you living? Come back with us. So months pass. Yes, months. And now, finally now, the campaign begins to find them. Now they become missing people. There's posters, there's faces on plastic bags, they appear on the missing list, there's local TV, there's at one point a national TV appeal to find them. It's so weird because I'm like, we just saw them in this hotel. They sat down and they gave an interview and then they disappeared again. And now the fucking case to find them begins. Right, so the judge, the same one who gave David custody, he finally arrives at his overall verdict on the divorce case. He awards David full custody of all of the Grazzini-Rucki children. They are now his and his alone legally. The judge says Sandra has never been able to prove any of the abuse allegations. She has proven nothing, not one thing. So the 3 kids, who he still has, they're given to David and he attempts to rebuild a family life with them. He moves back into the house. I mean, the girls are still missing. I feel like everyone at this point in the story is overlooking the fact the girls are still missing. So the police are working under the theory that Sandra is entirely responsible for the girls' disappearance. They think that the phone call was actually Sandra telling the girls to get out of the house and that she would get them somewhere away from their dad. They believe that Sandra may have used a secret underground network which specialises in hiding children. Now, this might be naive. I didn't know such a thing existed. Kind of creeps me out. I didn't know that there was such a thing, that there was a network out there where you could hide your kids if you thought that they were in trouble. I mean, I watched when I sort of went down a bit of a rabbit hole of research into this particular thing, and there are some really brutal stories where kids have said, I was being abused at home, and actually I found one of these networks and they got me out of the situation I was in and they got me to safety. So the more and more I looked at it, I was like, there are millions of these networks around the world. In my lifetime, I've just never come across them before. So now there's a reporter, okay, and he starts writing about the case, and he's doing it kind of in the hope of finding the girls. I mean, he doesn't, but who he does find, is an 81-year-old man called Dale. Now, Dale becomes a major part of the story. Dale is an ex-attorney living in Minnesota, and he says he fully believes that the Minnesota family courts are entirely corrupt. Before I get into what role Dale played, I'll point out that we are 2 years down the line from the girls disappearing. 2 years they've been gone. Whew. So what does Dale have to say for himself? He says he was with Sandra the night the girls vanished. Him and Sandra picked the girls up near the house and they drove away from the Grazzini-Rucki home. He says Sandra drove for 2 hours with no real destination. She told the girls, hide in the back and do not be seen by anyone who might drive past. He says Sandra was improvising at this point. She had no plan. She was just driving and driving and driving. She stops the car a few times. She makes a few phone calls. To who? Dale doesn't know. She drops Dale off home and she and the girls, they keep driving. I'm just going to interject at this point and say, why didn't Dale go to the police? The girls have been missing for 2 years. He's seen this on the news. Why has he not done anything about it? He says he believes with all of his heart that Sandra was doing her best to protect her daughters. Dale's a bit of a strange character. If you're so inclined to look him up, but I think he's a little bit odd. Once this article is published, Sandra is arrested. The police now feel that they know for sure she was involved. They'd always suspected it, but now they know. She's arrested on 3 counts of deprivation of parental rights. She's put into prison on a $1 million bail. But where are the girls? I mean, I keep saying it, I keep coming back to it, but where are they? Right, let's answer that question. 1 month after Sandra's arrest, David receives a phone call. The girls have been found. They are in the north of Minnesota, staying on a farm called the White Horse Ranch. It's in the middle of nowhere. Let's introduce Dee Dee Avavon to the story. She is a friend and a supporter of Sandra. She says the family courts in Minnesota are fucked, and as part of the investigation, police start looking at Sandra's friends and family in a bid to find the girls. And Dee Dee Avavon, she's just a routine part of that. But when they look on Dee Dee's phone, they find a recent photo of the Rocky girls. I don't think it's both of them actually, I think it's just Samantha they find the photograph of. And they go, well, that was taken like a week ago. So, okay, why have you got this very recent photograph of these girls who've been missing for 2 years on your phone? And because, technology is so good these days, they use do you know when you take a photograph, like I find this with my phone, when you take a photograph sometimes there's like a wee map that appears in photos and it tells you where the photograph has been taken. That's how they manage to locate the girls. So they zoom in and they go, okay, White Horse Ranch. So police go immediately there and there are the girls. There they are. So who are the next characters to enter this story? Well, there's Gina and Doug. Or Doug, I think it is. Gina and Doug run the White Horse Ranch farm. They run it as a therapeutic place for abused children to come and have some pet therapy. They have horses, alpacas, and they open their doors to those who've been through terrible, terrible times or experiences who can come and spend time with the animals. So basically how they got here was through Dee Dee. It goes like this. Sandra phones her pal Dee Dee and she says, I need somewhere to hide the girls. Dee Dee, she phones the White Horse Ranch and they agree to hide the girls. This is interesting. Doug and Gina were told the girls were coming to stay for 3 days only. I mean, it's a real human element here because, you would help anyone who needed it. I would help anyone who needed help. But surely there has to be a point for those two when they're thinking, what am I getting involved in? Where is the line here? Where is this is big. These 2 girls are coming here. I mean, how does 3 days become over 2 years? Now, Gina and Doug, they're actually facing criminal charges, along with Dee Dee, and of course Sandra, for playing the role in the girls' disappearance. It's just, it's just mad. There's so many people involved in this. So during the 2 years that the girls were there, Sandra would call the farm, but she never ever ever spoke to her daughters. She only ever spoke to Gina. I find that really strange. Why is she not speaking to the girls? She put them there. She puts them there. Why is she not speaking to them? I don't know. Asked if they thought that was weird, Gina and Doug say, yeah, very weird. She was concerned about them, but she never wanted to speak to them. So Gina and Doug, they tried to kind of reason with the girls. They kept saying to them, do you want to go home? Do you want us to somehow help take you back to your family? And they said that the girls showed an absolutely overwhelming fear at the thought of going back and living with their father. And that's why they kept them hidden for 2 years because they saw real fear in their eyes. And so they thought, okay, well, they just stay here because they're obviously terrified at the prospect of going back to their father. For the 2 years that they were missing, this is nuts, they became a part of the town. The girls used to go down to the church. They went to the hairdressers, the cafe, the shops. Everyone knew them. There was no secret that they were there. There was no secret that these 2 girls were there. But yet, they were appearing on the news as missing. And nobody was reporting it. Oh, God. Now, just to go back to those underground networks, that's not what Gina and Doug are part of. They're not a part of that underground network. They just happen to be people that run a farm that help kids who've been abused at some point, and they just were a connection that Sandra's pal happened to have. So police arrive at the farm, and tracing, from the photo, they get there, and they say to Gina and Doug, do you have these 2 girls here? And very openly they say, yeah, we do. They've been here for 2 years. So Gianna and Samantha are sent back to live with their father. Sandra is sent to prison. So I cannot imagine what that must be like for those 2 girls to go back into the house with their father. I mean, how does that conversation go? I'm really sorry we went on TV and told everyone that you were an abusive monster. And I'm really sorry we've been hiding for 2 years, but what's for dinner? So it's just insane. Sandra hires a new defence attorney who publicly states that this will all fix itself because they can prove the abuse that David has supposedly subjected them to. But can they? I mean, as far as I know, no one has ever seen any of the evidence that Sandra is talking about. It's back to what I was saying earlier on. How do you evidence abuse? Okay, she wrote things down, but that can be contested. That can be, that can be argued. I mean, her attorney is really confident, but when asked about the abuse evidence, she starts to kind of fall apart and say, yeah, I think it's in a box somewhere. I mean, it's really, if you watch this interview, it's really awkward watching her. Sandra looks livid as she's muttering, yes, there's a box somewhere that's got the evidence of the abuse. It just starts to get all a bit sticky. And Sandra says, oh, there's a police report that says David did this. And then it turns out there is no police report. And things that she says exist don't exist. And did they ever happen? Have they been deleted? I don't know. Detective Henderson here wants to know. Now, what Sandra has on her side is she has kids who are willing to say that their dad is a monster. But what if that starts to change? Let's go back to Nico, who was happy to post on Facebook, happy to talk openly about his dad's anger. He suddenly changes his story. He says none of it happened. My mum made me say it. He says Sandra would tell him, your dad is a bad, bad man, and that he believed her. He says that she stood over his shoulder and she forced him to write that on Facebook. This is a mess. What is happening here? What is happening in this story? I mean, Sandra's point at this point to counteract that is she hasn't seen Nico for a long time. Since having the kids taken off her, she's not seen them. So actually, she says David is just getting into their heads. He's now brainwashing them. He's now changing them. He's making them side. So where are we now with this story? Sandra was tried in a Minnesota court and she was sentenced to prison time, and she was fined $944, $1 for every day that the girls were missing. The case is still ongoing. Essentially, what it comes down to is that the villain in all of this is Sandra Grazzini-Rucki, who will more than likely face more prison time in the future for her actions during this time. It's unclear whether she'll ever be able to have contact again with her kids. Didi Evavold, she was convicted for her role in the girl's disappearance and she was sentenced to 8 years probation. Now, she has a blog and she talks loudly about children's rights and the family law courts. Sandra says, for the last 5 years, I have had to endure the loss of my children. I've had to witness from afar the repeated abuse of them go unheard and ignored. Now I am paying the price for doing what any parent would do. I was protecting them from harm. And so ends, kind of, the story of the Grazzini Rookies. Okay, so again, just to say, all of that's there, that's just the facts that are out there about this incredibly odd case, and it is still ongoing. There are so many support groups for Sandra. There's people who believe that David is in the right. There's people who believe that there's whole elements of this story that we don't even know yet. But I'm continuing to follow it because I'm continued to be really fascinated by that family and the choices that they made, and what is the truth, basically. Where is the truth in this story? That's what I want to know. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed that. If I do have updates in the future, you will be the first to know when things change in this story. Okay, so if you're not in the Facebook group, get yourself involved. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. You'll find me there. If you want to email me, extraordinarystoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also support the podcast on Patreon. And as always, if you know a great story, if you know an extraordinary story, let me know. Okay? Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.